So, what do you think is the problem with this claim that astrology originated as part of a magical worldview? I'm just going to stop sharing. And by this stage, you guys should be in a position to even answer this yourself, independently of assistance from Thagard. I'll even give you a clue. I'll type out a phrase I've used in the class before, and you tell me how it helps explain the problem with this question of origins. Nope. Come on, guys. I know it's late in the semester, but still. Okay, then let's walk through what Thagard actually says. So, Hemant, why don't you continue reading from here onwards? Yeah. Hemant or anyone else? Maybe Hemant is off. Anyone else?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
These objections,
Yeah.
These objections do not show that astrology is a pseudoscience. First, origins are irrelevant to scientific status. The alchemical origins of, sorry, is it right to pronounce it?
Alchemical, yeah.
Alchemical origins of chemistry and the occult beginnings of medicine are as magical as those of astrology, and historians have detected mystical influences in the work of many great scientists, including Newton and Einstein. Hence,
So people know what alchemy. Alchemy was a, this study of actually the the transformation of different substances into one another. And the aim was for things like, could you transform any substance you found into into gold. So alchemists are in this kind of imagination, interested in this magic potions and this kind of magic stuff, which led, at least in some respects, to the foundations of modern chemistry. Aditya, you want to say something?
Just saying that technically we can turn lead into gold now.
Is that right?
Yes, like it's just a nuclear reaction, right? You just have to add around, I think, 4 protons.
I
don't know. You need to take away 3 protons. And lead becomes gold.
Okay, I guess if you have the money to.
Yeah, it's really expensive because you need a nuclear reactor.
Right. The original motivations are lost. But anyway, that's what alchemy means. Okay, so carry on.
I think. Hence, astrology cannot be condemned simply for the magical origins of its principles. Similarly,
science, of course. So, do you guys get that? It's essentially a point about this.
Yes, sir.
Context of discovery, right? Just because it comes out of these people in the past who has these interests, that doesn't tell us about its status. And in fact, lots of science. So people like Kepler and Newton were like, totally into mysticism and astrology, but just because they had that, they had that set of beliefs, doesn't say anything about, are those beliefs justified? Does this sound like anything else we've done in the course so far? This kind of point? It's a bit like those ad hominem arguments, right? That you don't argue against something on the basis of question about who is it who has come up with it, what their interests are, this ad hominem, circumstantial, and that kind of thing. That's not relevant to the content of what's being said. So here also, this question of origins is independent of the content of the view itself, and lots of things that now are clearly be counted as scientific for him have similar sorts of origins. Okay, so go ahead.
Hence, astrology cannot be condemned simply for the magical origins of its principles. Similarly, the psychology of popular belief is also in itself irrelevant to the status of astrology. People often believe even good theories for illegitimate reasons, even if most people believe astrology for personal, irrational reasons. Good reasons may be available. Finally, the lay.
Just pause there. Right. So again, in a way, it follows from the same kind of point about what matters is the content of the theory, but here it's about, look, how does that matter if particular individuals believe this theory for the wrong sorts of reasons? And by the way, you'll remember in the Davolkar reading and in the one of the accounts, that article on the character of their work, again they say people come to these superstitions out of this need for clarity and order and so forth. Again, you might think, look, that's not relevant. The question is, after all, I may come to a doctor or for a COVID vaccine out of a need for clarity and a sense of safety, but just because I approach this topic with this kind of motivation doesn't mean that the thing I'm approaching is necessarily problematic. So does that make sense? Any questions there? Okay, then and so again, this point about good reasons may be available is something that you should recall from the discussion of those fallacies of relevance. The answer to fallacies of relevance, or the way to avoid the pitfalls of the fallacies of relevance, are always to ask, look, well, what is the thing we're talking about, and is there good reason to believe in it or not, independently of everything else. Okay, so carry on, Hemant.
Finally, the lack of a physical foundation hardly makes a theory as unscientific. Examples: when Wegener proposed continental drift, no mechanism was known, and a link between smoking and cancer has been established statistically. So, the details of carcinogenesis remain to be discovered. Hence, the objections of Bock, Jerome, and Kurtz fail to mark astrology as pseudoscience.
Okay, so just pause there again. By the way, this is a standard kind of, as I said earlier, practice in the philosophy of sciences. You have lots of examples of things that we take for granted now are examples of scientific practice, and then the aim is to extract from those examples more general kinds of features of what's going on that leads us to now regard it as science. So just the fact that right now there's no physical foundation being offered for astrology shouldn't rule it out, because that's been true for other now well regarded, well confirmed scientific theories as well. So what Taggart does is he he considers this one set of objections that comes from this at the time he was writing contemporary discussion, and then he moves on to other kinds of discussions that are familiar to us from the philosophy of science, right? The criteria of verifiability and falsifiability. We haven't used the word verifiable, but we've used a word that's similar. We've talked about confirmation, and he's now asking whether either that Hempel's account of confirmation, can we use that kind of account to rule this out as pseudoscientific, or can we use Popper's criterion of falsifiability? And he has nice frame. So if you remember, he says roughly a theory is said to be verifiable if it is possible to deduce observation statements from it, right? And you should just recall that Hempel schema of the test implications, where the test implications are things that test against what does he say there? Well, he says, look, in principle, astrology is vaguely testable. So maybe the very precise predictions are not possible, but it is it's something that in principle can happen. I think he mentioned this one study. Now, I haven't looked up since 1978. There must have been other work done to test astrological theories. But it's, look, in principle, you can do some stuff to establish confirmation or verification. And this is an important point that I've mentioned earlier in another context. And Hemant, why don't you read this paragraph, and then we'll find somebody else to read. These
findings and their interpretation are highly controversial, as are subsequent studies in a similar vein. Even if correct, they hardly verify astrology, especially considering the negative results found for the most important astrological categories. I have mentioned Guaclin in order to suggest that through the use of statistical techniques, astrology is at least verifiable. Hence, the verification principle doesn't mark astrology as pseudoscience.
Okay, so just pause there. So that's an important distinction to keep in mind, right? Is it verified versus is it verifiable? And the same thing you would say in the context of falsification. Is it falsified versus falsifiable? Anyone want to just explain these distinctions to me, or I mean to all of us? What's going on here?
I think so. This Michael Gerklin had researched on 25,000 Frenchmen, and then I think he collected data of their birth and their careers, and made some observations on that basis, like correlations between their occupations and the position of Mars, or like saturation, and जो भी ये वो होते हैं 12 है, I don't know zodiac.
Tell me something. When I type now, when you have the screen sharing, do you see the chat box also?
I think so. We can see by going there, but we can't. Verified versus now we can see.
Achha, oh, so I was assuming that
I think the message pop up on the screen, like
I see. Okay. No, so what I was asking was, that's true that what you just described is what Thagat talks about. But my question is, what's going on with this distinction between what is verified versus what is verifiable? Can you explain that distinction in a more general way? And analogously falsified versus falsifiable. Anyone?
I think, sir, the verifiable I can say, like we have just gone through. It's verifiable that if we can deduce any observation from something and then make some.
What's the difference between calling something verifiable and calling it verified?
Like a theory, we can say a theory is verifiable if we can deduce observation statements from it, and then that observations we can use them to confirm or disconfirm the theory.
So good. So maybe it's verifiable, but that doesn't mean that it's actually verified,
Yeah.
because the observations
Yeah.
you make.
If the theory is confirmed, I think then we can say that the theory is verified.
But it could turn out, just because it's verifiable doesn't mean that, you could do the observations and you could say, look, this theory is not, I mean, there are these counterexamples of these disconfirmations. So this is why, if you remember that, and I didn't say it very clearly at that point, the whole thing about the different Venn diagrams of science versus non-science and science versus pseudoscience and, good science versus bad science. The point is that the category verifiable is supposed to demarcate the science versus pseudoscience. But whether something is verified or not, that's a question that kind of you ask when your discipline or theory is already in the science basket.
Yeah, I think that whatever data we have already, we can use that data to verify a theory. Like you are saying this.
Yeah, and and many scientific theories are contested and are replaced. So just because um, an activity or a theory is kind of labeled as scientific doesn't mean it should now be accepted, because things labeled as scientific are frequently frequently superseded. So that's the distinction that he wants to make in that passage. And then he goes on to talk about Popper's point of view, and one thing that we mentioned, in fact, when talking about Popper, is this idea that because astrology is vague, therefore astrologers can't make predictions. We have astrologers who say, look, here's the prediction I'm making about, I don't know, the next election, and here's what I'm going to bet. If you're not able to, if I get it wrong, within a certain percentage, whatever, then I'm going to accept that my theory is false. And Popper is going to say, hey, I would respect astrology as at least scientific if astrologers were able to specify these benchmarks in advance, but in fact they're so vague that it's not possible to specify them. And on the theory of falsifiability, that's the problem. And Thakar's point, which we've talked about quite a bit, is that there's these very general problems with falsifiability, and we already looked in the reading and reading at, for instance, that objection, the Duhem, it's called the Duhem-Quine thesis, and that is this conversation about auxiliary assumptions. There's further, there's a reference here to this philosopher Imre Lakatos. We don't have to go into that. In the theory, in the philosophy of science, one point that was noted by the great historian and theorist Thomas Kuhn said, look, in the actual practice of the history of science, scientists don't just give up a theory whenever they come across a mismatch, in the same way that you don't give up a theory if your lab experiment doesn't bear it up. If the theory is generally like explaining a whole bunch of stuff, then they prefer to just call it an anomaly or think, look, it's going to be explained somehow. We don't know how, but we're confident that we can do it. And it's only when there are a bunch of these anomalies that keep piling up and there's no resolution of them, that then people get a little bit antsy about how strongly they feel about their theory. And then it's only when a better theory comes along that then they say, hey, you know what, we're going to abandon this current theory because it has all these problems, but in fact also because we have this a better theory coming along. So these are at this point, the point that falsifiability only occurs when a better theory comes along. Well, in principle, that could be true for astrology as well. So there's no, so falsification itself is not a good way to demarcate science versus non-science. And so on the one hand, you have these objections from scientists, which Thagard disagrees with. On the other hand, you have this tradition of thinking within the philosophy of science, which Thagard also disagrees with. And then he comes to his own kind of account. And here, why don't we get somebody else to read, starting with this demarcation criterion. So any volunteers other than Hemant?
Sure.
Sujit, go ahead. Oh, Aditya, Sujit is read more often than Aditya. So Aditya, why don't you go ahead?
A demarcation criteria requires a matrix of 3 elements: theory, community, and historical context. Under the first heading, theory, falls familiar matters of structure, prediction, explanation, and problem solving. We might also include the issue raised by Bock and Jerome about whether the theory has a physical foundation. Previous demarcationists have concentrated on the theoretical element evident in the concern of the verification and falsification principle with prediction. But we have seen that this approach is not sufficient for categorizing astrology as pseudoscientific.
So just pause there. So you've seen that, right? Our focus has been in the earlier readings on philosophy of science really has been on the content of the theory and what you can say about it, not about the community of people who practice that theory. Okay, so carry on.
We must also consider the community of advocates of the theory. In this case, the community of practitioners of astrology. Several questions are important here. First, are the practitioners in agreement on the principles of the theory and how to go about solving problems with their theory, which the theory faces? Second, do they care? That is, are they concerned about explaining anomalies and comparing the success of their theory to the record of other theories? Third, are the practitioners actively involved in attempts at confirming and disconfirming their theory? The question about comparing the success of a theory with that of other theories introduces the third element of the matrix, historical context. The historical work of Kahn and others has shown that in general a theory is rejected only when it has faced anomalies over a long period of time and it has been challenged by another theory. Hence, under the heading of historical context, we must consider 2 factors relevant to demarcation: the record of a theory over time in explaining new facts and dealing with anomalies, and the availability of alternative theories.
So just to pause for 1 second, this point that is just the one that I had made just now about the fact that practitioners don't just give up. Scientific practitioners don't give up just when they see what he calls an anomaly is what I was calling earlier a mismatch between the prediction of the theory and what you observe or you get experimentally. Okay, so carry on.
Sorry, sir.
Go ahead.
We can now propose the following principle of demarcation. A theory or discipline which purports to be scientific is pseudoscientific if and only if It has been less progressive than alternative theories over a long period of time and faces many unsolved problems, but the community of practitioners make little attempt to develop the theory towards solution of the problem, show no concern for attempts to evaluate the theory's relation to others, and is selective in considering conformations and disconformations.
Okay, so let me do this. Let's pause and think about this for a couple of minutes. I'm just going to go and get my a drink of water, and I'm going to stop recording for 1 second. So what I'd like you to do in the meantime is